So this is the seated bather, 1930. It's a female nude, obviously, by a seashore. It's as if we're seeing the interior of the body and also the exterior at the same time. We're used to the fragmentation of figures because of cubism, but this is something a little bit unique. We haven't quite seen anything equivalent before. It's as if we're looking at skin, flesh, but also as if we're looking at bones, internal structure. But the teeth or jaw, it's almost like some sort of insect's mandibles rather than something human. It's got something of that kind of different emotional tone, a little bit surrealistic in its reinvention of the human figure. Shading, but so there's sort of realism of depiction of the figure, but somehow the figure that's being depicted in this realistic way is not itself realistic. It looks like some kind of modern sculpture. It's again a painter's dialogue with sculpture. He never made sculptures like this himself. Other artists have come along and make these sculptures as a project, but it's part of his dialogue with sculpture goes on, I think, through his whole life. He's stuck with the human figure. That's so much his subject that he comes back to again and again. He won't ever push to abstraction. Possibly you could say it as a sort of limitation of his work, that he always has to come back to the human body. I'd compare it with this surrealist painting by Miro. This is Miro's Seated Woman, 1932. See how in the Miro work it's like you could be looking at her breasts or you could be looking at her lungs, actually. It's kind of interior and exterior. This also looks like internal organs. But, part of a dialogue maybe between the two. I think I would also like to compare it to the sculptures of Henry Moore. Of course, that's later in date, but some Henry Moore reclining female figure sculptures have that kind of bone-like sort of quality to them. Pared down look. They're usually more solid than this sculpture is, but nevertheless I think Picasso has inspired Henry Moore quite deeply. A painter inspiring a sculpture through his paintings of sculpture. Something kind of complicated. Girl Before Mirror, 1932. Oh, sorry, this is the mirror. And this is the Girl Before Mirror. So I think they're kind of related works. They both have mirrors, young female figures, and even this sort of diamond design in the background here, which comes back here in different colours in the Girl Before Mirror. The female figure here has some portrait dimension. He's starting to use his art in this time to reference events in his life or people in his life. Again, it's a complicated time. There are two women in his life, but there's a sort of calmer mood in his art comes through after he meets Marie-Thérèse Walter, a much younger woman who becomes a sort of, sexual partner and also a sort of muse for him, a mistress and muse. And all this sort of curvilinear vocabulary that he's using in works like this, it all belongs to that association with her more erotic imagery, if you like, coming through. The image in the mirror is different from the woman herself. an image is a mirror is a kind of image in the same way as a painting is a kind of image. So I would relate this to some of the works I'm going to show you in a minute, where you see artists and their models, images and reality put side by side. But we notice that the mirror reflection is not the same as what we're seeing. It's almost like looking into your own psyche, investigating your own inner world or something like that. There was some painting that people sometimes relate to this work where a woman looks into a mirror and sees a skeleton, something like that. The curvilinear forms, you can read those as very feminine, but then there's these sort of diamond-shaped grid geometric forms behind, which one could read as the sort of the male forms within the painting. The diamond shape is easily related to the costume of the Harlequin, the Harlequin figure of Italian comedy, and in his earlier work we see Picasso making a sort of self-portrait as a Harlequin. The Harlequin costume relates to his own persona. So this is a sort of way of introducing not just a male element, but his own presence within the work, possibly. Mayer Shapiro talks about the treatment of the body here as being like a sort of X-ray vision, as if you're seeing a rib cage, a womb, whatever, images of fecundity. Of course, X-rays, well, that's a whole research project, the influence of X-rays on art. It's a new kind of imaging that came in at the turn of the 19th century. We never saw the human body that way before, but now it's part of our whole way of approaching things. It's like the face on the left of the three dancers. There's that sort of double face, a front view and like with two eyes, or you could see this up by itself as a profile view, and then there's this strange second crescent moon face. Colour is quite important here, isn't it? But colour never has that sort of emotional expressivity or wonderful sort of decorative quality that you could get in a Matisse painting. Colour just sort of signals, helps you mark out different formal areas. There's a kind of harshness to it. Colour is never, in that sense, a main means for Picasso. Colour doesn't sort of breathe, I would say. One of the many artists who was inspired by Picasso in the second half of the century was Jackson Pollock. He produced this work only a decade exactly later, 1942 instead of 1932. And it's a work that brings together these sort of male and female forms, the curvilinear forms and the diamond forms, sort of yin-yang kind of imagery. I won't try to explain it in its own terms because we have other things to look at. But I just want to say, from his point of view, Picasso is a contemporary artist. He's looking at something made only a decade earlier. And he's really struggling how to respond to Picasso. Later abstract artists found Picasso, in this case an artist who's going to become abstract found Picasso, a non-abstract artist, more interesting as an influence than Mondrian or Kandinsky, the pre-war abstract artists. Couple of portraits I'll show you. This is Dora Mayer. So this is the older woman who was in his life, and they were having a difficult time in their relationship. And then Marie-Thérèse, the younger woman. They're both portraits from 1937. So we do see that sort of fragmentation of viewpoint which is there in Cubism brought back. I mean, you could say, oh yeah, well, faces don't look like that, but Actually, if you get up very close to it, to a human face, you can't see the whole of it. Maybe you start to become aware that you're seeing different things through different eyes. Now, maybe normally you don't get that close to a human face, but there are some people you get that close to. And remember, this is his lover. So, if you're kissing someone, you get that close that you are seeing different things through different eyes. I sincerely hope all of you have had that experience. And of course, the same thing here. Different visual vocabulary for each one. And this is kind of interesting. The painting a surface in some colours, covering it over with white, and then scraping away the paint. Yeah. I guess you may have played that kind of game as a kid. If you put colours down, crayons, maybe put black over and scrape through. It's a little playful, almost perspectival, the diagonal lines. Creates a sort of little box of space for her to be sitting in. Same here, a little skewiff room that she's in. This is her mother, actually. I've only got a black and white picture of the painting, the portrait he made of her. Apparently she was quite vain, so she took off her glasses when she was being photographed. But I'll give you a photograph to show. Actually, I don't have a photo of the daughter, but I have a photo of the mother. But there is a lot of the personality caught, I think, in the painting. Despite the rearrangement of the features and so forth. That was an inspiration for this work by David Hockney. He did two works of a famous writer called Christopher Isherwood. This is Christopher with his glasses on, and this is Christopher with his glasses off. I think it's sort of inspired by this one. Another example. I'm just giving you another example of an artist of a later time deeply interested in Picasso. I mentioned some of his works when we were looking at Picasso's old guitarist. David Hockney once gave a lecture, I think it was in LA, in the museum there, and the lecture title was announced as Great Paintings of the 1960s, something like that. And then when people turn up to hear him talk, he only talked about Picasso paintings made in the 1960s. Well, I'm going to be talking about works made in a studio setting, or going back to the question of art about art. So I was just showing you briefly this one, The Studio with Plaster Head, 1925. I want to focus rather, though, on this one, The Studio, 1927 to 28. Well, what is it? It seems to be an artist, the artist's canvas, various paintings on the wall, a table, something on sculpture maybe on the table, and the model. Could be a human figure, or it could be a portrait bust or something. Since the style of the whole painting is very abstract, we can't tell. I mean, this could be a realistic portrait bust, or it could be a real human figure. We can't even be sure of that. Every line here is on the canvas, so, well, we don't even know for sure that this is the artist. It could be a drawing, of the artist on the canvas. Well, there's something that escapes. There's this line here that escapes. The pen of the pencil, brush, whatever, escapes over the edge of the canvas. So that tells us, oh yeah, it is the artist. what's this? And this could be a mark made on the canvas, maybe just started, or it could be a sign to say the whole of the artist's palette held in the other hand. A human face, just some irregular geometric shape with 3 eyes. It's like saying how little information could I give you and still you will recognize it as a human face. I trust you that you can tell that something is a human face. You're not stupid. So even if I put 3 eyes, still you know it's a human face. Or here it's not 3 eyes, it seems to be 2 eyes and a mouth maybe. But the very, very reductive vocabulary, maybe influenced by, we're talking now about a time where geometric abstract art is widely to be found. So maybe he's not going to make any abstract art himself, but certainly it's sort of referencing a world in which abstract art exists. Harsh colour again, no sort of resonance to it, but colour is there, geometry. So art about the making of art, and there's a sort of play between the style of the painting itself and the style of what may be an artwork within it. This is a later cartoon, someone making fun of modern art, especially modern artists like Picasso. Some weird thing makes it self-portrait. Actually, it's a realistic self-portrait. Ha ha ha, But actually, Picasso is already there himself in these sort of works. He's already making those sort of jokes about reality and representation. Here's another studio scene, The Painter and Model, 1928. This is the model. Well, it's so stylized. Again, we can't tell whether it's a portrait bust on a table or something, or a stool, or whether it's a figure. Maybe it's a real figure, but it just looks so stylized because of the way it's represented here. And the artist is just as stylized as the figure. Funnily enough, the image on the painting is a little bit more recognizable. So this is I think a more complex joke than this one in a way. A print. Painter and his model, 1931. Well, the image on the canvas is just a scrawl of abstract lines. This is a reference to a short story by the great French realist writer Balzac. He wrote a short story called The Unknown Masterpiece, and just to cut the story short, there's this painters working on their great masterpiece and won't let anyone see it, and this is going to be the work that finally sort of captures reality. It's really going to be perfect. And then at the end you discover what the painting is. It's just a mess of marks and nothing can be made out at all. And I think it's become this is Picasso sort of roughly interpreting that story, I think. It's just a kind of a metaphor for the impossibility of capturing life in art. Art and life are just going to be so different. Life is mobile, ever changing. The world of a painting is static. In so many ways, the richness of life can't ever be captured. Realism is just an impossible project. So every work of art is like this, just a few marks on a surface that never capture what is in front. There are some ways to go from here. One way would be to say, let's give up representation altogether. Let's become an abstract artist. but for Picasso that's not a route. I'm looking at, just started looking at etching. I'm going to carry on looking at etching now. Looking at various etchings from his Villard Suite of etchings. Now he worked on this over quite a number of years, from 1930 to 1937. It's named the Villard Suite because it was commissioned by Villard, who we've already seen his portrait more than once, the art dealer. He paid Picasso in paintings by Renoir and Cézanne. Completed in 1937 then, and Villard himself died in 1939, and that's also the year the Second World War broke out, which ended in 1945. So it's really after the Second World War before people really get to see this long series of etchings. Because it took such a long time working on it, over 7 years really, you can imagine his concerns as an artist, his interests changed quite a lot over such a long period of time. So you actually do see a variety of different themes coming up within it. But many are about art. So, okay, I was talking about Cubism as art about art, a sort of meta-art. But just because he's not working in the Cubist style here doesn't mean that he isn't interested in talking about art. All these works about the studio and images like this is still art about art, but in a slightly different way. So artists, models, images that they have made. It seems to be, in this one, it's after making art. Maybe the implication is after making love too. It's got this sort of post feel to it. Model and a sculpture. Again, it's a kind of a two-dimensional artist, basically a painter and drawer, and printmaker, representing sculptures of the kind that he himself never made. It's very surrealist looking sculptures. Another theme that's big in the Villard etchings is the theme of looking. In this case, someone looking at a sculpture. The person doing the looking is a model, so a model is a person whose profession is to be looked at, So in other images, maybe that comes out more. This is Villard himself, who appears as a portrait. There are several different versions of the portrait of Villard. Now, of course, that's something in the nature of printmaking. You can go back to the same plate that you're working on, and you can print out one state, then you can rework it and print out another state. That's not the case of all of the works in the Villard Suite. Some of them only have one state. He just did something, he was happy with it, that's that. But others get reworked. It's a little bit like what we can do, with a computer. We can save one version, then change it, that kind of thing in Photoshop, or even with your essays, you can save your old versions. By the way, back up your essays that you're working on, save versions. Computers do crash. This is just the straightforward technique of etching. Let me just briefly describe that in case some of you haven't had that described to you before. So you're working on a metal plate. The basic difference between etching and, say, wood block print is in a wood block print, the ink is put on the raised parts of the block, and you cut away the bits that you don't want to get printed. Whereas with an etching, it's the reverse. You have a metal plate, you cover it with a resin, a varnish, then you scrape with a tool your image. Linear, it has to be a linear image. You don't gouge the metal out, you're just scraping the varnish off the surface. You don't have to press hard like an engraver would. An etcher just kind of a light kind of line, light kind of touch, more mobile kind of line than you get in engraving. Then, when you finish, you dip the whole thing in a bath of acid, and the acid eats into the metal where it's exposed by your work, eats away those lines, but the varnish doesn't let it eat anywhere else. Then you wash it off, you take the varnish off with a solvent appropriate for that varnish. Then you ink the plate, but whereas with a woodblock print you're inking the raised surfaces, with an etching you're trying to get the ink into the lines, and you'll wipe any that's spilt on the surface, you'll wipe clean, unless you want those marks to be there. Of course you can do what you like. And then you'll print, with a woodblock print you print in fairly low pressure, but because in a etching you need to take up the ink that's down in those little valleys of the lines, you use high pressure, and maybe the paper is a little bit damp, it gets pushed under high pressure into those lines and picks up the ink. So one of the qualities of etching is a lovely kind of sharp line that you couldn't get if you were just drawing. You know, you mustn't do this, but if you were to see one, you could actually sort of feel the line raised up on the surface. There's a slightly embossed quality, so that creates that sort of sharp quality of the line. But because of the nature of the technique, you can only produce linear effects, except that there are variations. There's something called aquatint, which is a way of putting the varnish on in an irregular way, so that then it creates sort of tonal areas. So this is using aquatint, and he's also learning new variations. Aquatint is just a variation of etching for producing tonal area. But then there's also other things like sugar lift. I think he must be using that here for the beard, for instance, where you can brush something onto the surface, then you cover it, and then you get the break the surface open, and then you put aquatint on those brushed areas, things like that. So there are all sorts of complicated variation. Picasso worked with a printmaking artist. He didn't do the printing himself, just as Benvenuto Cellini didn't cast his own bronzes or whatever. It's a common sort of thing to employ specialists to help you. One set of images that come up a lot in the Villard Suite is the sort of images of the Minotaur, half man, half beast, half bull, that is. So it becomes an easy symbol of the brutal or animal in human nature. Sometimes he's in the studio. At other times, he's in a more sexual situation, and it's more almost sort of rape-like connotation about it. The female figure is asleep, unaware of what's approaching her. So sexuality comes in a lot in the Villard Suite. But this theme, I think you can think distinctly about this theme of the gaze. There's lots of images, several images of someone looking at someone, or unidirectional gaze. She's not aware of being looked at. That's a detail. Again, it's a satyr. Again, it's sort of half man, half animal. The animal side of human desire, if you like. And she's asleep, not aware of it. But it could be the other way around. It turns the table, so it's the female figure who is the bearer of the gaze. It's not just always the male figure. that would be an example of aquatint there to create the lovely sort of gauze-like effect of a curtain, so we can see the figure behind, but we see the curtain too. And this is all aquatint as well to create the light falling down on her body. Lovely effect of light here. Of course, the other advantage of producing prints is you can produce multiple copies. This is a technique that is the most simple, really, of the etching family of techniques, and this is dry point. With dry point, it's called dry because you don't use the acid bath to etch the lines. You just scrape the lines into the surface of the plate. It doesn't actually. It's not like the hard plate that you use for engraving. It's quite hard work. You can just scratch a line quite quickly. So, although etching techniques sounds very complicated and long drawn out, the process, actually you could produce an image very, very quickly, especially with this dry point approach. So with the dry point, you're gouging the metal out of the lines. It's not as neatly cut as if the acid cuts the lines. So that burr that's created when you displace the metal from the lines is there still on the surface of the plate, and it will catch up a little bit of the ink when you ink the plate. And that's what you see here. You get that kind of slightly feathery kind of effect, or a different kind of expressive quality. Maybe you see in the detail. These are all dry point lines, I would think. Slightly sort of fuzzed effect or feathered effect to those lines. Of course, it's a fugitive thing that as you use the high pressure of printing, those kind of lines, the burrs will be pushed down. You know, after a while you find you can't print anymore. So unless you're using aquatint to create tone in a etching, you just have to crisscross your lines a lot. That's the only way you can create tone. You can't put the lines together side by side, otherwise there won't be anywhere the ink will catch the ink for printing. You have to crisscross them. Yeah, so sometimes he's an aggressor, sometimes he's just one of the pals, in the studio. So he's an ambivalent character, the Minotaur. Sometimes he's good, sometimes he's not good. Here it's almost like a kind of art as a sort of, the studio as a site of an orgy or something like that. But also he's a sort of victim in some of the plates. So an extended sequence like this that the Villard Suite has allows you to explore different possibilities, different facets of a theme. So the dying Minotaur, or the vanquished Minotaur, sorry. The dying Minotaur. Or the blind Minotaur. No, he's the victim as well as the aggressor. Of course, the Minotaur has a bull's head, but it's not a bull. It's different. The Minotaur myth is a myth of Pasiphae. She had a sexual liaison with a bull, and then the Minotaur is the son born, and he's kept in a labyrinth, sort of as a way of encaging him. It's a Greek myth. It's not the bullfight imagery, but Picasso, as a Spaniard, is very interested in the bullfight and does represent the bullfight. And here we have a kind of arena-like situation. One thing about the bullfight, the bull seems to be very strong and powerful, but yeah, at the end of the bullfight, it always ends the same way. The bull is dead, you know. It seems strong, but it's always ends up the victim. So same with the Minotaur, maybe, you know, he seemed very powerful and dangerous, but oh no, he's the one that dies. So in some images he seems sort of aggressive towards, sexually aggressive towards women, but here female figures are showing some tenderness towards him as the victim. They all have the same features, the features more or less of Marie-Thérèse Walter, the woman in his life at that time. So there's some kind of biographical dimension here, but that's not all that's going on. Or the Minotaur has his other, which is the kind of the human hero. We see this even in the metopes, the decorations of the Greek Parthenon, which many of which are in the British Museum. We see the lapiths and centaurs in battle with each other, human against animal, or half animal and human, the fully rational human against the more animal side of human nature. And maybe Picasso was sort of playing around a little bit with that. Okay, that's enough for today. So I'll see you again on Friday for the test. Please try to be there on time. And then next week we'll look at a few of the later works of Picasso. You can see there's only 4 left on the list, but I've got a lot of studies for Guernica to show you, drawings that will take us a little time to look at. And then we'll also be looking at Chinese modernism as a way of trying to decenter, in a small way, decenter the kind of Western centeredness of this course, because I want us to never be trapped inside one cultural situation, and we'll use China to play that role to relativize European modernism and to investigate the question of, you know, to what extent all these kind of themes we've been dealing with, the vision in crisis, whether there's a counterpoint to that in other cultural situations as well. So we won't have time to do the whole story of that, but we'll tell a little bit of the story of that.